You look out at your garden bed in November and think the worst is over, don't you? Think again. This is exactly the moment the fate of your strategic winter vitamin reserves is decided. Many people assume cabbage is a bulletproof vegetable that fears nothing. But if that's true, why does half your cellar end up in the compost pile by January? Today, we won't just talk about cabbage. We're going to tackle the main paradox of November. Why a seemingly perfect-looking head can rot in a week, while a modest, unassuming one lasts right until spring. I'll tell you what the seed producers won't, and we will finally solve the dilemma. Should you chop it up and ferment it, or protect it and store it whole? Ready to learn the foolproof secret to that perfect crunch? Let's dive in. But before we grab the knives and choppers, let's understand exactly what we're dealing with. Cabbage in November isn't just a vegetable, it's a biological time bomb. Complex chemical processes are currently taking place inside the head. Sugars are being redistributed, and the cell walls are either strengthening or preparing for collapse. Historically, our ancestors didn't have refrigerators or supermarkets. For them, a storage mistake meant scurvy during the winter. That's why they knew exactly. This type goes into the barrel, and that type needs to be hung by its core from the rafters. We, however, often confuse hybrids, timing, and methods. Today, we're going back to these basics, but we'll fuse that ancestral wisdom with modern agronomic knowledge to truly understand the physics of storage and fermentation. Let's start with the very first step, the one that trips up 90% of home gardeners, and that is the weather. A lot of people panic the minute they see the first frost and rush out to chop everything down. But hold on, cabbage is actually quite cold hardy. A light frost, say down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit or -4 Celsius, actually does it good. Why? Because cold temperatures trigger the process of converting starch into sugars. This not only makes the cabbage taste sweeter, but crucially, it raises the concentration of cell fluid, which acts like natural antifreeze. But here's the catch. If the temperature dips below about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, or -6 or 7 Celsius, the inner leaves can sustain real damage. You won't see this externally. The head will thaw and look perfectly fine. But internally, tissue necrosis will begin. You absolutely cannot store a head like that. It needs to be processed immediately. Now let's talk about properly identifying your cabbage varieties. Are you absolutely sure you know which specific kind you're growing? We often plant the seedlings, mix up the labels, and then spend the fall simply guessing. This is a critical error. Some varieties are genetically incapable of long-term storage. Take the popular pickling cultivars, for example, like Slava. It is magnificent for sauerkraut, juicy and sweet, but if you try to keep it in the root cellar, it will be rotten by New Year's, no matter how carefully you store it. Then you have the true rock-hard storage types, such as Kolobok or Amiga. Right now, these might seem tough, dry, and perhaps even slightly bitter. But these are the ones built for the long haul. Their prime time won't actually arrive until February or March. Look closely at the head shape. If the head is flattened or slightly squashed, that's almost certainly a pickling or immediate use variety. If it's perfectly round or oval and dense as a stone, that is your ideal candidate for long-term storage. Now let's move on to inspecting the heads. Picture yourself as a doctor on rounds. You need to examine every head from all sides, searching for hidden dangers. The biggest threat isn't slug damage on the outermost leaves. Those can simply be stripped away. The real danger lies in microcracks and evidence of grey mould, or botrytis, right at the base of the core. If you spot a slight grey fuzz, or even catch a faint whiff of mildew, that head absolutely cannot be placed in the general storage area. The fungal spores will spread instantly and contaminate the rest of your harvest. Another key enemy is caterpillars hiding deep inside. They will not hibernate in your root cellar. Trust me, they will continue their destructive feast, tunneling and contaminating the cabbage with frass, which guarantees internal rot. It's best to shred such heads immediately, making sure to cut away all damaged sections. The question that always sparks debate online: should you uproot your cabbage completely, or just cut the head off close to the ground. Let's clear this up. If you are planning on storing the cabbage by hanging it up or burying it in sand, then it's best to leave a long stalk, about 5 to 7 centimeters long. Ideally, you would just pull the entire plant out by the root. The root continues to feed the head for a little while longer by slowly transferring stored nutrients. However, if you plan on storing your cabbages on shelves or in crates, a long stump can become a liability if it starts to rot. In that case, we cut the stem, leaving only about 3 centimeters. The golden rule is this: the cut needs to be clean and completely dry. If the cut stays damp, dust it lightly with some wood ash or standard chalk. It's simple, old-school disinfection, and it absolutely works. So you've brought your crop in from the garden. What's the next step? Do not rush it straight down to the cellar. That is a critical mistake. Cabbage needs a period of curing and acclimatization. If you move cold cabbage into a warm or humid storage area, condensation will immediately start forming on the heads. Wet cabbage is dead cabbage. Instead, spread your harvest out in a cool, well-ventilated space, like a garage or an enclosed porch, for a couple of days. Allow those outer wrapper leaves to dry out slightly until they become papery, almost like parchment. They will then serve as the cabbage's natural protective wrapper. This initial drying period is crucial. It allows the cabbage heads to cure and heal any minor cuts or bruises that are unavoidable during the harvest and transit process. Now let's take a look at your storage conditions. The ideal storage temperature for cabbage is very specific, between 0 and 1 degree Celsius. Absolutely no higher. At just 4 degrees Celsius, the cabbage starts actively respiring, meaning it wakes up, losing precious moisture and weight. Humidity needs to be high, around 90% relative humidity, but critically, you must avoid condensation or any dripping moisture on the walls. If your cellar is too dry, the cabbage will quickly wilt. If it's too damp, it will rot. If you don't own a thermometer and a hygrometer, go get them now. They are a minuscule investment that will pay for itself many times over by saving your entire crop. And finally, a crucial tip: cabbage absolutely cannot tolerate being stored near apples. Apples release ethylene, a gas that forces produce to ripen and age rapidly. If stored alongside apples, your cabbage will begin to sprout prematurely. Let's look at the first storage method, the pyramid or stack. This is a classic approach. You stack the heads onto the shelves, core side facing up. A crucial detail: the cabbage heads must not touch. You need good airflow between them. If one head starts to rot, it shouldn't be able to infect the neighbouring cabbage. Some gardeners choose to separate the rows using paper or straw. While this is effective, paper can easily absorb moisture and become a breeding ground for mould. It is best practice to use wooden, slatted shelves, and absolutely do not place the cabbage directly onto a dirt floor. Be sure to lay down planks or use wooden pallets. Ventilation from below is just as crucial as ventilation from above. Check your stored stack at least once every 2 weeks. Now let's talk about a method that always sparks heated debates: using plain old plastic wrap. Does it work? The short answer is yes, absolutely. But you have to do it right. You need to select a perfectly healthy, dense head of cabbage. Strip away all the loose outer leaves until you reach that tight, solid white layer. Trim the core right down to the base. Then, tightly, and I mean very tightly, wrap the head in several layers of plastic wrap. The key is making sure there is absolutely no air pocket between the plastic and the cabbage leaf. This film creates a sealed, isolated atmosphere with elevated carbon dioxide levels, which essentially preserves the vegetable. Cabbage preserved this way can even withstand slightly warmer storage temperatures. But here is the massive caveat: if there is even one hidden spore of rot inside, you will not get cabbage. You will get a bag of compost. It is a high-risk method, but the results make it worthwhile. If you have the space, the best storage solution is the suspension method. This is arguably the most reliable storage technique available. Take the whole cabbage heads, roots still attached, tie them together in pairs with twine or rope, and suspend them from a beam or crossbar near the cellar ceiling. This ensures the cabbage doesn't touch any surfaces and is perfectly aired out from all sides. It also makes it much harder for rodents to reach. In this elevated position, the cabbage can breathe properly, preventing it from sweating or spoiling. The only major drawback is that it's bulky and takes up a lot of vertical room, but if you have a spacious basement or cellar, you should absolutely try this method, even if just for part of your harvest. This is precisely how cabbage was preserved in old country estates and manors. If you live in an apartment and your only option is an insulated balcony, then the storage box method is exactly what you need. Start by getting large styrofoam containers or sturdy wooden crates. You'll want to line the inside of the boxes with reflective insulation, like foil-backed foam. Lay the cabbage inside and bury it in dry sand or sawdust. The sand works as an effective buffer. It wicks away excess moisture and helps keep the temperature steady. However, you must remember that temperatures on a balcony can fluctuate rapidly. During severe frosts, you'll need to cover the boxes with old blankets. And crucially, during a warm spell or thaw, you must air them out to prevent the cabbage from getting too hot or steaming. Balcony storage demands constant supervision. This is not a hands-off operation. But what do we do with the heads of cabbage that didn't quite make the cut? The ones that are cracked, slightly frozen, or maybe just a standard, less than perfect variety? The answer, of course, is to ferment them. But many people make a critical mistake here. They treat fermentation as merely a way to use up scraps. No, friends, that's wrong. Making good sauerkraut is a high culinary art. For truly perfect sauerkraut, you need white, juicy inner leaves. The tough, green outer leaves will introduce bitterness and often turn the final product a greyish colour. So be ruthless and strip away absolutely everything green. The cabbage you use for pickling must be rich in natural sugars. Taste a piece of the leaf. It should be nearly as sweet as the cabbage core itself. If the cabbage is bland, the fermentation process will be sluggish, leaving you with a soft, rather than a wonderfully crisp, final product. Let's dive into the magic of fermentation. What makes cabbage turn sour? It's lactic acid bacteria. They live right on the surface of the leaves, and our job is simply to create the perfect environment for them to thrive. They need initial warmth, an absence of oxygen, and nourishment in the form of natural sugars. Salt acts as the key regulator here. It draws out the cellular liquid to create the brine, and simultaneously suppresses harmful pathogens until our beneficial bacteria are strong enough to take over. If there isn't enough salt, the cabbage will turn soft and slimy. But if you use too much, the fermentation process will slow down and the resulting flavour will be harsh. That's why you should forget about the measure by eye method. Write down the golden formula for crunch. You need exactly 20 grams of salt, 1 kilogram of shredded cabbage. Not a tablespoon, not a handful. It must be 20 grams. Buy a kitchen scale. It will change your life. And the salt itself must be standard, coarse ground rock salt. No iodized salt, and definitely no fine-grained table salt. Iodine kills the beneficial bacteria and turns your cabbage into a soft, useless mess. You need pure sodium chloride. Weigh the cabbage after you've shredded it, add the salt, and massage it with your hands. But don't go overboard. We just need the cabbage to release its liquid, not turn into a soggy mess. Now let's talk about the mix-ins. The classic choice, of course, is carrots, but don't overdo it. Carrots contain natural sugars, and if you use too many, they can turn the brine orange and drastically change the final flavour. The optimal amount is 3 to 5% of the total cabbage weight. Want a little more kick? Try adding dill or caraway seeds. If you want that crisp, winter freshness, toss in a handful of cranberries or lingonberries. Some fermenters even add tart apples sliced into wedges. These are all great options, but remember the foundational rule: the cabbage is the star. Your additions should never overpower the main flavour. And make sure to mix all your additions in thoroughly and evenly so that every jar has a perfectly balanced flavour profile. One very popular myth is that you should only ferment sauerkraut during a waxing moon or on specific male days of the week. But honestly, the bacteria truly couldn't care less about the moon's position. Temperature is what they care about. The optimum starting temperature for fermentation is 18 to 22 degrees Celsius. Place your jars or buckets in the kitchen, but make sure they aren't right next to a heat source. If it gets too hot, the bacteria will go wild, and your sauerkraut could become overly sour in just 2 days. If it's too cold, the process won't even start, and the cabbage will simply spoil. Feel free to use the lunar calendar for peace of mind, but the thermometer is the only reliable tool. The most crucial step, and one many people skip, is degassing, or releasing the built-up gases. During fermentation, carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide are released. Hydrogen sulfide, in particular, has a pungent odour. If these gases remain trapped within the cabbage, the final product will taste bitter. That's why, twice a day, you should take a long wooden dowel or a clean knife and pierce the cabbage mass all the way to the bottom in several spots. You'll immediately see bubbles escaping. This is what we call burping the cabbage, or allowing it to breathe. You need to continue this process as long as the active foaming lasts, which is usually the first 3 to 4 days. As soon as the brine clears up and the foam disappears, you know the fermentation process is complete. What if you don't have enough juice or brine? This is common if the cabbage heads are a little dry. Never leave the top layer of cabbage exposed and dry. Anything that isn't submerged in the brine will quickly mould or rot. If necessary, make a substitute brine. Mix 1 tablespoon of salt into 1 litre of boiled, cooled water and pour it in until the cabbage is fully covered. You must also place a weight on top. Use a plate and put a jar filled with water or a clean rock on top of that. The weight presses down on the cabbage, forcing out any air and keeping it completely submerged in the liquid. This ensures that the crucial anaerobic bacteria can work correctly and safely. Once the active fermentation subsides, you need to get the sauerkraut into a cold place immediately. Our main goal now is to stop the process before it gets overly sour. The ideal storage temperature for finished sauerkraut is between 0 and 2 degrees Celsius. That means the refrigerator, a cool root cellar, or a very cold balcony. If it freezes, it will lose some of its crunch when you thaw it out, but the flavour and nutrients will stay perfectly intact. However, if stored in warmth, it will quickly go soft and become quite unappetising. So sauerkraut is definitely a high-maintenance product. It absolutely demands this shift in temperature control. Let's cover an urgent situation. It's midwinter, you head down to your root cellar, and you notice the heads of cabbage you stored are starting to spoil. Don't panic. This is not a death sentence for the entire harvest. Carefully remove all the affected outer leaves until you reach the healthy, firm white core. Yes, the head will be significantly smaller, but whatever remains is perfectly salvageable. Use this rescued cabbage immediately for soups, like stew or borscht. Make traditional cabbage rolls, or prepare lazy cabbage rolls and freeze them as a convenient ready-made meal. Most importantly, you must remove the source of infection from the cellar immediately, so it doesn't spread to the rest of your stored vegetables. Finally, let's talk about a very common issue: sauerkraut that has turned slimy or ropey. Why does this happen? Most often, it's due to letting it ferment at too high a temperature initially, not using enough salt, or sometimes using cabbage that is overly high in nitrates. Is it safe to eat? Generally, yes. If it smells normal, just sour and acidic, cooking it in a soup or stew will ensure it's safe. However, you definitely won't want to serve it raw in a salad. The texture is just too unpleasant. To avoid this next time, you must strictly control both the fermentation temperature and the salt ratios. Fermentation is pure chemistry, and accuracy here is absolutely key. Alright everyone, harvesting cabbage in November isn't just about an ordinary vegetable, it's a serious project. We've established that you should only store late-season varieties and only the perfectly healthy heads. Anything even slightly suspicious? Throw it straight into processing or preservation. Don't forget the 20 grams of salt rule, the importance of temperature control during fermentation, that essential thermal shock, and good ventilation in your cellar or root storage. If you follow these simple guidelines, you'll have crunchy salads and hearty, flavourful stews available right up until spring. This isn't magic. It's just applied biology and a little bit of patience. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. I hope this helps you avoid those common mistakes that can completely ruin your yield. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and give this video a big thumbs up. Now for a question for all of you. What's the most unusual ingredient you've ever added to your sauerkraut? Cranberries, apples, or maybe even beets? Let me know in the comments below. Let's talk recipes.